On this week's episode of the Soccer Business Podcast, I'm joined by Alexi Lalas, former US national team player, former general manager in Major League Soccer, and now the voice of soccer on Fox Sports. We talk about MLS, we talk about the World Cup, USL, Pro Rel, youth soccer, NWSL, everything. It's a broad sweep through the entire landscape of American soccer. Enjoy it. So, Alexi, let's dive straight into this one. We've obviously known you for many years on television. People know you as a player. But when we're talking soccer business, you did have some experience behind the desk, as it were, at the New York, New Jersey MetroStars and at Los Angeles Galaxy. Talk us a little bit how you look back on that period and what you sort of learned about seeing the game from that different point of view.
Yeah, so when you're a player, you are by design insulated and isolated from the business that enables you to do what you do. And I was always interested in asking questions and thinking about what comes after. And I get young players sometimes that'll come up to me and ask me for advice. Not like I have any magic wand or any significant insight, but what I do know is that if you see an opportunity to jump off, really look long and hard at it, because very few athletes get to ride off into the sunset. And so I was not the smartest guy in the world, but I was smart enough to know that I was in my mid-30s. I could have continued on and played, but an opportunity came about to go into, the front offices of the game that I love. And I at least reminded myself, you know what, this is a good jumping off point that can lead to other things. And when you think you're done, it might not be there again. And so I said, all right, I'd like to do it. I went up to San Jose for the San Jose Earthquakes, and I was the president and GM up there. Then went to New York, which was then the MetroStars that turned into the Red Bulls. And then I came back to the Los Angeles Galaxy. And each were three distinct experiences. I learned very quickly, a tried and tested type of rule: surround yourself with good quality people, and it makes things easier. Up in San Jose, it was a team that ultimately relocated, and having to deal with the dynamic of that for the men and women that work there was something. I went to New York, which was a team that ultimately was sold and rebranded, and so having to deal with that through a staff and team that was going through that. And then obviously in Los Angeles with the whole hurricane of David Beckham. Ultimately, what you get very quickly, if you didn't have it already, and sometimes, like I say, you're insulated, is a great appreciation, respect for the men and women that do the day in and day out work of selling this sport. And it's a very different type of work, but as equally as important. And I think if and when you're done, you leave with as much appreciation and respect for those men and women as any player or team that you were involved with.
And was that quite different for how you viewed people in a front office situation when you were a player?
Yeah, I think I had a level of respect and acknowledgement, but I didn't realize the day in and day out, not just grind, but this labor. Now, it's a labor of love for a lot of them, and the industry has changed dramatically. It's actually kind of gratifying to see how a lot of men and women that now come into the soccer business and the industry aren't using it as a stepping stone and aren't looking past it. They want to work in soccer, and that's not necessarily something that has always been the case. A lot of times it was the most direct and quickest pathway into the industry, and so you're dealing with people that obviously there's nothing wrong with wanting to move ahead, but they didn't necessarily want to be in soccer. And I think it's much more populated now by people that see the opportunity that soccer is and really relish being in soccer. There are certainly other sports, and it can translate to other sports, but soccer is unique. But I got a crash course. I made plenty of mistakes along the way, ultimately got fired and all those different things. I don't regret it for a second because, again, it gave me an incredible perspective on a game that I thought I knew, well, a lot about. I don't know everything about, but a game that I thought I knew a lot about. And this perspective and this type of day in and day out existence opened up a whole new side of that world.
Yeah, it's interesting to see quite a few players moving into those positions now. I mean, at all levels, I think Eddie Pope is at Carolina's MLS Next Pro Team, Carolina Core. There's people, obviously, Carlos Bocanegra has been at Atlanta for many years until recently. You know, we are starting to see players see that front office as a viable option rather than the idea of I'm either going to coach or I'm out of the game.
Yeah, and there's an interesting competitive moment that happens because obviously you are seen in the light of what you did on the field, and you are that personification of a player and all the baggage that comes with that. And yes, absolutely, you are getting an advantage. You are, to use the current vernacular, privileged in what you are given. But that door only stays open so long. And so you got to take it with both hands, and immediately you have to prove yourself. Now, because you're a player, I think that competitive juice constantly flows, but the balance is very different now because you're coming into their world, if you will. And a lot of them that have worked very, very hard, a lot of them that are incredibly good at what they do, and you got to hit the ground running. And that's why I say you got to surround yourself with good people. You have to have an open mind. But you also have to don't completely throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of what you've been through. As a matter of fact, oftentimes they're using you to kind of get that different perspective of a player. And it's not always right, but I think it can be beneficial in the back and forth and the conversation that you have and the unique perspective that you bring having been on the field.
Yeah, I think it's good for the game to have a mix of backgrounds, isn't it? In those front offices, you want the person who understands the stock market, and you want the person who understands how player development works and what his people on that side are going through. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also the dynamic of a team. Let's be honest; it's kind of a family, and there's all sort of palace intrigue and all this kind of stuff that goes on. And don't think for a second that there isn't, like I said, jealousy and resentment and competition. Some of it good, some of it bad. And I've often heard when people talk about ex-players getting into business that you've learned all your lessons from playing and what happens on the field. If you behave in the same way that you behave in a locker room, in a front office, you'll get fired very quickly, to be quite honest with you, in some of the things that you do. So you do have to make an adjustment. And the ones that are smart and the ones that are able to recognize and suss out the situation very quickly, do that. Yes, you bring lessons from everything that you have been through, but it is a different type of world that you are coming in. And initially, you are being accepted in. Sometimes, like I said, there's some resentment, but you are being, I guess, more invited in. And you are a guest, and you have to adapt to that world as opposed to trying to make that world adapt to you.
Yeah, you've gone from that world into broadcasting. Obviously, the last time I saw you on my screen, you were on the edge of the pitch, SoFi Stadium, with with Stuart Holden and your podcast partner, and going through what was a pretty miserable Nations League for the US team. Don't really want to go so much into the on-the-field stuff there, but we have a World Cup coming up. Everyone is talking about this being a huge moment for soccer in this country and the possibility to take things to another level. Don Garber's called it rocket fuel for soccer in America. Does American soccer need this team to actually be a success, either on the field or in terms of the way it connects with the public, for that to happen? Because we know the World Cup can be a success without that, but American soccer maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to maximize this summer, right? I'm talking to you today because of the '94 World Cup. I lived the power of what it can do to an individual. It changed my life forever. That's my individual experience. But more importantly, it changed soccer forever in the United States, as did the 1999 Women's World Cup. And so you get these moments. Now, in the summer of 2026, the world is coming back, and our domestic world is also experiencing something where the landscape has dramatically changed. But it's no less of an opportunity. And I guess there's an element of responsibility, too, in terms of what we're doing. We've talked now, I don't know how many years, we've talked about this ramp, right? Well, that ramp is no longer a ramp. It's a couple steps away. We're 440 odd some days away from it. So you have to have plans in place to maximize it. And I think that's where I'm hesitant to use it, but the fear I have is that we're not going to harness this World Cup, as Garber said, on steroids, because it is rocket fuel. It is an opportunity. But the opportunity I see is when the circus leaves town and what that legacy is. What are we left with the day after the World Cup? And I only think that it's going to be good if we have planned and if we execute, and like I said, we harness that 6 weeks that is going to happen, because it's all fine and well to have the circus come and leave town, but if all is left is, cleaning up a mess, then that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, and I've written an article in this week's newsletter saying this, that there's still an attitude amongst mainstream sport America, if you like, that yes, people are interested in soccer now, but it's an international game, right? We love the Champions League, the Premier League. The domestic thing, well, it's there, but it's not really as relevant as the foreign leagues are. That's still there. It's changed, obviously. It's a matter of degrees, but that's still there. If the US has a World Cup where they don't get out of the group stage, and I think connected to that, they don't make an impact in the broader sense off the field either, does that strengthen that? Do we see that problem of Americans investing in soccer in Europe and not in this country, and all that side of it strengthened at the expense of this being this huge takeoff moment for domestic soccer?
Yeah, I think we had more to lose in '94 than, for example, than we do in 2026. Soccer's not going anywhere. I think when we talk about the way soccer is perceived, as you know, Simon, we love to spend people's money and tell them what to do with it, and we're very good at that, to be quite honest with you. And that's I think where I'm a little disappointed here now, 30 plus years on, when it comes up to 2026 from '94. I would have expected we would have been bigger and better, and yet somehow I'm also in saying that not giving enough credit, because what has happened in that 30 plus years is really unprecedented if you look at any other landscape and culture out there. But I guess the American in me wants more. American in me wants to be the best, wants to compete with the rest of the world. And to your point exactly, the unique aspect of soccer in the United States is, one, it's not king. It's not necessarily something that is a traditional sport, quote unquote traditional sport. And the compare and contrast with the rest of the world is something that most of the other sports and leagues that we have don't have to do. And in order to live up to that, we have to do big, bold things. And if the World Cup on the field, from a U.S. men's perspective, is a failure, yeah, it's not going to help, but I don't think it's going to destroy soccer. And again, I want it all, to quote Queen. I want it all, and I want it now, right? And maybe that's greedy of me. But again, I think it is the American in me saying, let's grab this opportunity and on the field do what we need to do to bring as many people into the tent and to leave that legacy. And off the field, make sure that 30 years down the line, when people are talking about 2026, that it's in a very different way that we're talking about, for example, 1994, in that we used it and we were even faster and quicker, and we were much more progressive and used that World Cup to do things in the immediate as opposed to decades and decades down the line.
Right. I mean, the big things happened. And Major League Soccer came into existence a year or two after that World Cup. Things changed radically. That's probably not going to happen this time, but that level of radicalness of the change. But on that team, I mean, I remember in 1994 that US team, looking at it as somebody, a young guy in England watching it, and it was like, oh, the Americans play this game now, right? And the shirts were a little bit crazy, and you had the rock and roll thing going on, and it was all very much new. It's not going to be like that this time, but I do wonder if this team isn't a little bit too far almost the other way, that I'm not seeing. American sport loves stars, doesn't it? There's quarterbacks exist for a reason, and the way the NBA is constructed. Okay, Christian Pulisic is probably the star of this team, but he's not a particularly outgoing, charismatic guy. And I'm not seeing. They seem quite a sort of shy and not a particularly exciting bunch of people to sort of promote. Is that a concern?
Yeah. I mean, I can't make them, to quote Bonnie Raitt, I can't make you love me if you don't, right? And I can't make you something that you aren't. I can't make them be swashbuckling and massive personalities and the things that I kind of love about sports, and the things that my generation, and I certainly did, modeled myself after. I loved larger than life personalities. And so I set about creating a character, if you will. And when I say that, recognize that it doesn't mean that it wasn't genuine, but I've always considered myself an entertainer. You know, I rehearse, which is basically practice. I go out in front of a audience, which is fans. You know, you go on stage, which is the field. You wear a costume, which is your jersey. And so I always looked at myself like that. This team is very different, and I know there's some angst in previous generations as we watch this team, because we want that for them. We want them to try to be bigger than life and to do things that we didn't do, and so we can see things that we haven't seen before. And we also recognize that type of mentality is what enables you to do great things. But yeah, I mean, if in our effort to create better soccer players, and look, this generation has so many more advantages and pathways, but if in our effort to do that, we've washed out some of the grit and some of the heart and some of the personality, then we're the architects of our own demise to a certain extent. But I'll tell you what, even if you're just looking at it from so the kids nowadays, they call it branding, right? Your brand. We never thought of it like that, but we understood the way we presented ourselves was our brand. So it existed. We just didn't call it that. If you're concerned about your brand, and if you want to have a global reach with your brand, there's no better platform than the World Cup. So you better be ready. Now, it's not all about how you look and what you say and that kind of stuff. You got to back it up on the field. And I think they have the talent to do that. But we might have to accept the fact that we have this team that is never going to be what we want it to be, and that it may be kind of blah and homogenous in terms of its character. That's not a good thing, but who knows? Maybe they rise to the occasion and we see something we haven't seen.
Well, I mean, we live in the meme era as well, don't we? And a big event like a World Cup, this is what somebody was saying to me to sort of counter my sort of pessimistic view on that, was that, you know, a Clint Dempsey stare would go viral these days, right? Just a moment like that, and something happens during a group stage game where somebody behaves in a certain way or reacts in a certain way, and it can take on a life of its own, and suddenly they're a character and personality we didn't know about. So it can happen, yeah?
Yeah, it can definitely. I mean, I think about the things that I did, and had there been cell phones and cameras at every turn, I mean, everything would have gone viral for good and bad. Let's be honest. It might have been a problem there. But this is the age in which we live in. This is the age in which they are playing. They are also very savvy in terms of having grown up in it. But again, it creates opportunity, because there is a platform out there to get out what is going on. Now, also back then there was, you know, your traditional types of stations that you watched, and everybody kind of tuned in, and so it's kind of scattered right now, and is, you know, spread out in terms of what happens. Everybody's got a microphone, everybody's got a platform, everybody's got distribution. I think that's a good thing. I think the more voices, the better, but it also means that our attention is diverted to so many different places out there. But I tell you what, you do something in a World Cup, and instantaneously the world sees it and knows about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. You said around the World Cup, you said it many times on your own podcast, the State of the Union, that something big should happen. People should be thinking big around 2026 and 2027 and 2028 and the aftermath of it. The only thing I've seen, I've seen two things. One from USL, which we'll get on into in a minute. But from MLS, the only big sounding thing that's come forward so far is switching the season around from playing fall to spring rather than the other way around. Is that a big enough event to capture that moment in time that comes with a World Cup?
No, I don't think so. I think it is, and I don't think it's designed to deflect attention. And so that's why I want something big. I love big, bold, arrogant things. And again, it's easy to tell people how to spend their money. And MLS is the most successful professional soccer league in North American history in the 30 years that they've been around. But I think they can be so much more. And if you're not going to do it relative to the 26th World Cup, then when are you going to do it? And so when I say do it, I mean make it something that we haven't seen before in terms of the money. MLS has plenty of very, very deep-pocketed billionaire owners out there. If there was a mandate from Trump, an executive order or something that came down and mandated that MLS needs to be the #1 soccer league in the world, we have the capability to do that with the people that we have in place, with the potential that we have as a market for the United States and Canada, and 30 years of experience when it comes to Major League Soccer. It could be done. They've decided that they don't want to do that, and you have to, recognize that this is what has gotten them this far. But again, with all of this attention and all of this goodwill that is surrounding this moment, timing is everything, and using it to establish doing something different than has been done before. I just think we're wasting this moment if we don't do something big. And yeah, changing the schedule, that's all fine and well. But I think it has to be much more around, hey, we are actually going to compete with the rest of the world. Because with all due respect from the country of origin, your country of origin, people, the migration to the EPL didn't happen because of weather and food, okay? People went there because that was the place to go. That was where the money was. And it can happen again in a completely different way to North America, because unlike Saudi Arabia or China, this is a place where players want to go and play and where their families want to go. But you got to make it worth their while, and they can't lose credibility when it comes especially to their international careers, or I guess to their brand, by coming over here.
The curious thing is, I think when I talk to people back home and in Europe about it, they're kind of presuming that after this World Cup, it's going to be one of those things where somebody came and looked a star player, they're from a different country, we didn't hear of him before, it's the World Cup, and then MLS is going to sign them, and it's going to be, America is going to take advantage of this moment to bring these people in. And then when you look at how the MLS recruitment's going, and you think, that would be a very radical change. There's no sign of any loosening of the spending restrictions and the roster rules to allow for a team to go out and just spend very, very heavily. Why is there that little bit of small c conservatism in MLS, do you think? Are they scared of, are they still worrying about the NASL thing that people talk about with overspend and so on? Or is it just a solid business now and they're wary of going too far the other way?
Yeah, I do think that there is a business strategy. And yes, it is conservative, but you also have to say it's been successful. But incremental gains are all fine and well. And look, in business, people will tell you all the time, think about the long term, right? Our stock market goes up and down, and if you have to be able to ride it for the long term, and ultimately that's where you make your money. The irony is that MLS was actually established on doing exactly what you just framed. Back in 1996, when MLS kicked off, what happened was, after the 94 World Cup, MLS went out and identified a group of players that had starred in that 94 World Cup and brought them to Major League Soccer to kick it off. Your Valderramas and all the U.S. players. So it has been done. It could be done. But to your point, the restrictions when it comes to spending, because we're in a very different spending world right now, and if it's being done, hopefully it's being done to compete with the rest of the world. In order to compete at that level, fundamental change would have to happen with regards to salary cap, restrictions, etc.
Do you like MLS, though? Do you enjoy watching it?
I love it. I mean, it's La Cosa Nostra. It's our thing. I wear it on my sleeve. I recognize that it is flawed. It is worthy of debate and criticism out there. I also think that the perception of it from the outside in sometimes is more positive than even our domestic perception of it, which is crazy. I actually talked to Garber about this the other day, and it must be maddening to him that that's the case, because we have been so focused on how the rest of the world sees us. Sometimes American soccer in general, we eat our own. But our perception of the quality that exists is sometimes much lower than the rest of the world. And keep in mind, this is such a unique league because of the manufactured parity that sometimes it's apples and oranges when you're comparing and contrasting it.
No, I do a podcast with some friends back home in Burnley fans, and they're all journalists who happen to be connected to Burnley. And one of my friends has never watched MLS, and he watched the Cup final last year, MLS Cup, and he said, I loved it. He said, I enjoyed it so much, he said, because they're not playing Guardiola pep ball. They're making mistakes. And he said, guess what? Mistakes are fun. Like, I hate people being so cautious all the time in European football. And so I think you're right. When I talk to people in Europe, they are aware that the standard is better because they're watching it. I mean, the Apple thing, for all the problems, that's another topic, but people are able to watch MLS games very, very easily in the rest of the world. And I think that sort of the Euro snob attitude is much more coming from Americans than it is from Europe these days.
Yeah, and again, going back to the unique aspect of it, the haves and the have-nots that is, for the most part, the norm when it comes to leagues around the world, and certainly leagues in Europe. Because of the things that we're talking about, some of the restrictions and the salary cap and the way that the league is run, anybody can win in this league. And that you can't say that about a lot of other leagues out there. I think that does make it unique. I think it does make it exciting. Yes, it does mirror the goal of many other American professional leagues. And again, it doesn't mean that MLS isn't subject and shouldn't be subject to criticism out there. But it's just a very different type of existence. I think players get a real appreciation for the challenges, whether it's the travel, whether it's the weather, whether it's the different surfaces, whether it's the different areas that you're playing in, and then the actual competition.
I mean, one thing you can do in American soccer, moving away from MLS now, one thing you can do in American soccer that you pretty much can't do anywhere else is start a completely new club in an established city where there's other sports teams, but start a soccer club at whatever level you want, make it happen. We had Michael Hitchcock on this show last week talking about doing it in 20 different markets in Texas and rural North Carolina and all sorts of places. I think that's one of the most interesting things that's going on at the moment, that it really is happening on that sort of grassroots level. USL trying to capture that with building a Division 1 league, whatever that means exactly, and introducing, last week they say they're going to introduce promotion and relegation into that system. That is a big idea for post-2026. What do you make of it, though? Is it a realistic one? Do you think it's a good move?
Yeah, so first off, for your listeners out there, it is a bastardized version, for lack of a better word, of promotion relegation because it's an intra-league promotion relegation. USL will have multiple leagues, but all under the USL league. And then they will go back and forth within that. And I've talked about this when it comes to Major League Soccer. Major League Soccer, like I said, in its 30th year, 30 teams, huge league. At some point, they may want to look at MLS 1 and MLS 2, but that would be an intra-league type of promotion relegation. Look, the pro-rel conversation is evergreen. I actually love it in that I love to have the conversation. I got no problem with promotion relegation. As a matter of fact, anybody, and in this case we're talking about USL, that wants to try it has my full support. I have lived it. I know what it means. I know the excitement it produces. I know the competition it produces, and I know the environment that it produces. However, I don't need it to enjoy my soccer, and I certainly don't think that it should be mandated on anybody out there. Having said all of that, I'm really curious to see if USL first off does it, and then is it the actual silver bullet, if you will, and this panacea for American soccer? Are the people just going to come rushing in because this has happened? I suspect no. There will be a curiosity, and it will be kind of an interesting test case to see how it functions and how the teams function within this. But I just think too often promotion relegation has been a convenient excuse as to why something isn't working or why something would be better, or just an excuse for people not to watch something.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'm really looking forward to with it is that because they're doing it together with what presumably is a pretty large expansion process to create a Division 1 team, because half that Division 1 team is going to be new teams, we're told, not just teams from the existing USL stable of clubs coming up from the Championship. So they're going to be going through a process saying, please come and invest in our league where we're starting promotion and relegation in a few years. And that's been the argument from MLS has always been, people won't invest hundreds of millions in building soccer-specific stadiums if next year they have one bad season and they're out of the division. And we're going to see that now because USL, surprisingly for me, that bringing those two things together, I think the Division 1 expansion is an attempt to grow their league and expand it. But bringing relegation in, does that act as an incentive or a deterrent to investment?
Yeah, this has been the argument forever, and it's a completely legitimate business argument. You are already facing a risky proposition, and you are paying extra, shall we say, to mitigate this big risk of, for the most part, it's the relegation challenge and problem for these folks. Mm-hmm. And so now you're going to ask many of them that have already bought in under these original guidelines or whatever, and now you're going to say, all right, I want you to voluntarily reassume that risk. And what business person is going to do that when some of the things that they are doing require long-term investment? And if now you have pro-rel, but it's at the expense of somebody spending tens or hundreds of more millions of dollars to provide an infrastructure that helps soccer develop, is that a good thing? I don't know ultimately. I will say this. I hope that U.S. Soccer, the United States Soccer Federation, which obviously sanctions these leagues, and you have the professional league standards, I hope that they work with USL. I think that they'll get waivers when it comes to the requirements that exist, because I wouldn't want there to be obstacles. Now, within reason, if safety issues and all these kind of stuff, I want that.
But if it's 14,000 instead of 15,000,
but some of the arbitrary types of things that I think should be looked at and should be justified from a U.S. soccer perspective, I hope that they find ways to work, because I have no problem, and there's nothing actually stopping anybody from having two Division I leagues, and that is the ultimate form of capitalism and competition. And if you can build a better mousetrap, I'll tell you what, if people come running and want to buy your product, and I know I get grief sometimes for calling it a product, but it is a product. You have customers, there's a market, and there's a business, and we've been talking about it here on your podcast here. It's not a pejorative, it's a good thing, and you have to think about these things. And if you have a better product out there and you bring it to market and people come flocking, then well done. I will cheer you.
Last topic is another evergreen one. We've been going through a few evergreen ones here, but the youth soccer scene, we've had a lot of people already interacting with us from the youth soccer world because it's so huge. There are so many organizations out there, so much business activity going on there. Big debate that constantly comes up, and we're going to be doing a special show on this, is the whole issue of pay to play, as it's called. And I've seen you on Twitter debating with people about it and so on and so forth. One of the interesting things I've noticed recently, and my position has always been, if you want an alternative to it, you better create it, right? And in England, we don't worry about it so much because we have a lot of volunteers and dads and people who are willing to coach for nothing. That's probably not the situation here. So if it isn't, if you want to provide free soccer, as you call it, find a way through philanthropy or something else to provide that free soccer. I think it's an interesting development that people are starting to do that. But what's your take on it? What's your defense of paid for play, as it were?
Okay, so a couple of things. Free soccer costs. Somebody has to pay for all this free soccer. I would love nothing more than every man, woman, and child that wants to play soccer in the United States to be able to do it for free. But who is going to pay for all that free stuff? And by the way, this applies to culture and society in general too when we talk about free things. Somebody has to pay for that. The other thing is the vilifying of the men and women that spend each and every day working in youth soccer, and that is their livelihood, that is their job, that is their business. I will not abide that. I think that men and women who work in soccer should get paid as much money as they possibly can. This notion that it has to be this altruistic type of approach, and that this is some sort of charity out there, I think that's wrong, and I think it's ultimately detrimental to the growth. Having said that, can we do better? Of course, but I think in any industry, and this is an industry, you're going to have people that do it well and people that don't do it well. You're going to have people that have more money and might do it worse than other people that have less money and might do it better. But that competition, and it is a competition, and there are some incredibly successful coaches, incredibly successful clubs out there when it comes to development that I think deserve praise for what they are doing and the type of product that they are offering and the results that they are getting. Now, into that ecosystem comes MLS teams or professional teams that are establishing their youth systems. And I think that that's really where it's going to be interesting. Yes, it's elite, and I recognize that it's limited, especially in a country our size. And then the third component is this existing, speaking of infrastructures, this existing infrastructure and this traditional infrastructure that you have that we call college soccer, right? That has, gone the way of the dodo for the elite player. In that, when I was growing up, if you wanted to make it as a soccer player, the pathway was you go and you play soccer, usually Division I, you get seen, and you go on and on and on. Now, they completely bypass that. But this tradition and this infrastructure they have still sits there, and I think it is an underutilized infrastructure that if we could, rejigger it and use it to our advantage, you just add all of those facilities that you have, all of that tradition you have, all of those opportunities that you have, and then you have a whole nother plate of development that's going on. But as you know, the NCAA does not function relative to soccer, and the schedule is so condensed. They're looking to get it bigger, and I hope that they do. And it's a behemoth when it comes to the NCAA in terms of moving something. But it's just sitting there waiting to be, regenerated, if you will. And it's a pity that it's taken this turn right now.
Yeah, there is a lot of talk, isn't there, about possibly, at the USL2 level, which is where a lot of kids end up playing in their off season, as it were, that there might be some way of incorporating college soccer into that pyramid in some way, or I don't know exactly how that would work, but
yeah, like I said, people recognize that it's there. It's just how are they going to do it legally, and practically how are they going to get an NCAA to change something that has been there for decades and decades and decades. But I think it behooves the NCAA. And the good part is, as you know, and as your listeners know, the NCAA is dramatically changing right now. Indeed. So they are kind of ripe for doing things that in the past we thought never could be done. So hopefully we find a way to do that. Because I don't care where you're playing. I just want you to be given opportunities to play. And when you're there, I want you to have good facilities. I want you to have good coaching. And ultimately, whether you're playing in the World Cup or you're professional or not, having, not just soccer, by the way, having sports in your life is beneficial. And it makes better people. It makes, from physical perspective and from a mental perspective, it gives you tools and it gives you opportunities and it helps you in life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do think there is a case around that about, there still is the problem of the people who can't afford, the people who really maybe have a talented kid. I've come across people in Miami myself who've asked me, do you know anywhere that's affordable for my kid to play soccer? Because the PSG Academy and the Barcelona Academy, and there's a lot of people in that space. Actually, the cheapest one was the MLS one at Inter Miami that regularly goes and has a look at local talent, and you can turn up. But there is something there. But I think people need to work on developing some structures where it's not about attacking the people that you rightly defend. It's about creating we have scholarships in college as well. Is there a way you can use something similar to that to get around?
And look, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there aren't still players that fall through the cracks, and that's a pity. But you're also dealing with a country incredibly large, a country where soccer is not king. And I do feel that the identification of talent at a much younger age is happening much more so than it has in the past. And so while there are still players falling through the cracks, and that's something that we don't want and we want to change, less of them are falling through the cracks. Eventually, word gets out there if and when there is a good player, and more importantly, the opportunities that player then has, even if that player can't afford to be here or there. All the MLS academies are free. Even when you talk about clubs, there are sponsors and there are scholarships and all these types of things that are done. So if the player is good and gets recognized, and those are two different things, but if those two things are there, chances are they will find a way and they will find a place, even in the existing structure, as much as we still want it to get bigger.
Last question. Thinking big, looking beyond 2026. Let's say you're asked to be the man to reshape American soccer in the next 10 years. what would you like to see it look like by 2036?
Well, first off, we have to stay out of the courts, right? It seems that every other day somebody's suing somebody else and there's some other litigation. And this is not just in soccer, this is culture in general. What I've found is the world can go this way or that way, but ultimately the lawyers always win, right? So hopefully we stop suing each other and taking each other into court. When it comes to Major League Soccer, we talked about some of the big, bold things. And by the way, this doesn't also just apply to Major League Soccer. Like we said, USL, and even when it comes to the women's game, NWSL can't rest on their laurels.
Right.
The rest of the world is coming, and with very little type of effort, given the existing infrastructure and the culture, they can change things. And we've already seen that from an international perspective. You look at Spain and others out there in England and what they are doing. So NWSL, I think, really has to look at the future if they want to maintain their dominance and their importance and their being credible around the world. They have to do some big things. But when it comes down to is, I want to see whatever training wheels are on soccer, take them off. Let's just see what we can be as a soccer country without any of the restrictions, without any of the stopgaps, without any of the challenges that sometimes we create for ourselves. But I'll say this finally. Don't let anybody tell you that America isn't a soccer country. Yes, it's different. Yes, it's unique. But it has a long history when it comes to soccer. And when it comes to what soccer is right now, you will not find a more passionate, vibrant, discerning, and educated type of fan base out there. And much of it is out of necessity, right? what we've had to do, this compare and contrast that we talk about. Yes, it's different, like I said. Yes, it's unique, but I think we need to lean into the American version of the game, and not be apologetic. Don't apologize for anything. I know our insecurities and our inferiority complex are legendary. We got to shed that, and I'm as guilty as anybody out there, because there are good things coming on and off the field. And again, the potential of America to be a soccer playing nation, the likes of which we have never seen before, are and continue to exist. And that's why people say, hey, there is gold in them, they're American hills.
We're going to leave it on that point. Thank you very much indeed, Alexi. That's been a fascinating discussion. I did hope that bringing you on would at least prompt the thought for the next 10 discussions, and it has done exactly that. So we'll be talking more about all these things in the future, but that's been great. Thank you so much.
I'm here to provide you content, my friend.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.